Good evening, welcome. I'm John. I'm a bookseller at Literati bookstore in downtown Ann Arbor, Michigan. We're so pleased to welcome Rooja Mohassessy in support of When Your Sky Runs Into Mine. She'll be joined in conversation this evening by Adrienne Christian. Just a quick webinar overview for those of you who are just joining us. The chat is closed this evening, but you can keep the chat window open. I'll be sharing links to purchase When Your Sky Runs Into Mine throughout the event in the chat. The Q&A is available to you to use, however, so whenever you have a question, please feel free to submit it using the Q&A, and I'll read a selection of those questions at the conclusion of the conversation this evening. And live transcription, is also available on your toolbar as well using the CC icon. If you're watching us later on YouTube, you can always find links to purchase books in the description directly below me. You can also click on the typewriter icon at the bottom right corner of your screen to be subscribed to our channel and kept up to date with all of our at-home with Literati events once they become available there. And as a reminder, you can shop for more books at literatibookstore.com to have shipped to your home anywhere in the United States. And if you live in Southeast Michigan, our doors are open to the public for in-store shopping. But most of all, we'd just like to thank you for your attendance this evening or this morning or much later this evening or this afternoon, depending on where and when in the world you may be joining us. Without further ado, I'll introduce tonight's author and our interlocutor. Rooja Mohassessy is an Iranian-born poet. She is a 2022 McDowell Fellow and a student the Pacific University MFA program in Oregon. Her debut collection, When Your Sky Runs Into Mine, was the winner of the 22nd annual Elixir Poetry Prize and will be released by Elixir Poetry Press. Now it's out now. Her poems and reviews have appeared or are forthcoming in Narrative Magazine, Poet Law, Rhino, Southern Humanities Review, Ninth Letter, the Adroit Journal, New Letters, the Florida Review, and elsewhere. Speaking with her this evening, Dr. Adrienne Christian is a writer and photographer and the author of two poetry books, Worn and A Proper Lover. Worn was one of Rumpus's most anticipated books of 2021. Adrienne's poetry has been featured in Hayden's Ferry Review, World Literature Today, American Life and Poetry, and others. Her nonfiction has been featured in Bust, Next Avenue, Phoebe, and more. She's been nominated for 2 Pushcart Prizes and was a finalist for the Rita Dove International Poetry Award. She received her PhD in English with a concentration in creative writing from the University of Nebraska. Please join me in welcoming Rooja Mohassessy and Adrienne Christian into your living rooms.
Thank you, John. And hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. And hi, Adrienne. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with you.
I think, let's see, we're going to sort of keep things fluid tonight, right? I'll read some poems and feel free to jump in with questions even between the poems if you like, and then we will have, I think we'll have some, if there are questions from the audience, we'll also leave some time for questions at the end. How does that sound?
That sounds good to me. About how many poems would you like to read tonight, Rooja?
I think I was planning on 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
Does that sound too many?
No, that sounds perfect. And are you going to talk a bit about how you chose which poems you plan to read?
If you'd like me to, I can do that. But I was actually thinking of, I just did a reading at Green Apple in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And I had prepared, I think something like, I forget, maybe 15 poems or something. And this was an hour reading and it was just me. And I managed to get through 6. And there's somebody at the back holding up the Q&A cards like, really, is it time already? How did that happen? So feel free, that's basically just to say, feel free to tell me, cut me off anytime. Okay. But I selected the poems tonight thinking, I've been reading, the book has only been out for about 2 weeks, but I've had a lot of readings and I'm sort of getting tired of reading the same poems. So I'm reading a couple of poems that I have never read before. And so, yeah. And usually I start readings these days by reading a poem by a contemporary Iranian poet. His name is Ali Asadullahi. Ali is in prison right now. He's been in prison for now about 3 months. For about a month, he was in solitary confinement. And he was arrested at his house, and he's being detained with no charge. And there are about, I think, 18,000 protesters who are in prison right now, and in Iran. And the revolution, we're calling it now a revolution, is not dying down. Yesterday was the 40th day of the execution of the two protesters who were executed, and 40th day of passing in Iran is a big day of mourning, and so people were back out on the street. Of course, the regime's attempt with those executions was to frighten the people, and for a little while it worked. People were not coming out as much, but now they're back out on the streets, and it has been 6 months. So I do feel like, it is a revolution, and hopefully it's the beginning of the end of this brutal regime that's been in place for 44 years. So I'd like to start by reading a poem by Ali Asadullahi, and I'm going to show you a picture of him. I should say a little bit about Ali. He is a young man. He's already published 6 books of poetry, and he is a well-known figure, a well-known poet in Iran, very active in the literary scene. He's quite a scholar of literature, and he has also translated some of his own poetry and published them in English-speaking journals. And he also reached out to me and asked me to try to republish one of his long sort of epic poems that was published in a journal here. So I'm trying to send it out to various different places. And so his family and friends have started a page for him on social media to try to increase awareness about his case. And it's the page is called Free Ali Asadullahi, and I'm going to show you the apologies, we were speaking about this during the preparation. Can you see were you able to see it? Not really, I think, no? Okay, let me try that again.
I think you might not have screen share. Oh, there we go. Yep, there we go. Now we can see it.
This is Ali. Right, this is the hashtag of the page that his family and friends are keeping for him. And I think it's got over, they just started, but they've been very active on it, and they've been posting his poems. Beautiful. He's a brilliant poet. And this is an excerpt from a poem of his, a short excerpt of it. I'm going to read it in Farsi and then in English. چنین به گریه خوانده بود پرنده‌ای که از فراز خاک خون کشانده وطن گذشت. چگونه زنده مانده اید؟ چگونه زنده مانده اید؟ And I'll read the Farsi. Passing over the fields of a nation drenched in blood, a bird cried, "How do you keep alive? How do you keep alive?" Okay, so I'm going to start by reading some poems.
Rooja, for those of us who are following along with this award-winning collection, would you mind telling us the page that you are reading from so that we could go ahead and turn to that and follow along with you?
Thank you. Yes, I'll do that. I noticed actually at a couple of the in-person readings, people had the book and they were following along. So thank you for reminding me. I should always do that. So this is on page 5. And I'm going to share screen. I should say that the collection, here it is, by the way, is ekphrastic, and the poems are inspired by the artwork of my late uncle Bahman Mohassess, the prominent Iranian painter and sculptor. He passed away in 2010, and he can be called the father of modern art in Iran. And about 85 or 90% of the poems are inspired by his artwork. And the artwork is not in the book. However, I have uploaded them onto my website. And on the gallery page, you'll see the page number and the title of the poem that's paired up with the artwork. So I'm going to share screen again and show you the artwork that inspired this poem. Can you see it? Before and after the revolution. In the 80s, countless shipments were denied entry onto our land. I wonder if rubber dildos still buoy on the gray sea, bloated, greasy with the surplus of embargoed oil, choking that long inflamed passage through the straight neck of Hormuz like a midnight belch. They turned away many goods and colors, our men, barely managing, fumbling to keep our confounding thighs, our unruly hair out of view, and ruled the country with a fist without aid, trade, or imported hairspray. The 50s and 60s had ushered in the tango. The twist would arrive next in cassette tapes packed with overlap miniskirts. After the revolution, Sony players still sucked the Hollywood VHS in place, coached folks in the new Occidental moves. My aunt shows me a photograph of women clapping to each other's jig, her belly dancing hips swaying in the warmth of a kerosene heater. By late 80s, the definition of dirty dancing grows so broad as to embrace lashes, lips, and other indecencies. Young women are urged to keep still, not fiddle with their faces. Then stoning comes in vogue. Most, me included, miss out entirely on Swayze's steps. Some friends of friends get 99 lashes for playing the clandestine soundtrack past earshot, 1 lash for every name of God. Virgins get it the hardest. Guards insert Coca-Cola bottles into rectums, determined to seal each fate beyond repair. They take pains to leave vaginas gaping in their wake. The girls dare not leave their cells, their souls splayed, pronounced no longer fit to pass through heaven's narrow gate. After half a century, they still won't trust us with a casual glance, a dildo, though we can't help but sit with our hair by the window and enjoy the Persian rose, the scent wafting in, out and in, freely. I should say what prompted this poem was something that just horrified me, something I read that I wonder if it's true or not, but I actually tend to think that it is true, but that Khomeini, the father of this Islamic regime that's been in place for the last 44 years in Iran, he had sanctioned the rape of young girls because according to Islam, if a girl is a virgin and she dies a virgin, she will automatically go to heaven. And in order to make sure that they did not make it to heaven, he sanctioned the rape of these girls. And these right now, we know for sure that a lot of the girls who are in prison are being raped and tortured, and many of them, when they are released, actually commit suicide. There's psychological torture and physical rape and torture, and also some another horrifying thing that's happening. I think it's important for the world to know the brutality of this regime. so that they don't get away with impunity as as much as they have been all these years, is that it seems like they were actually the Basijis, or the paramilitary Revolutionary Guard, who were on the streets fighting the protesters. They were told to shoot girls in the eye with the plastic bullets, in order to, of course, one thing is to destroy their beauty, but also the second reason was so that when they were at the hospital, they were able to identify them and take them to prison. And right, so I think it's just unimaginable, the cruelty, but that's what I read, and that was way before the revolution. This poem I wrote already a while back, and I was doing a bit of research, and I ran across this edict by Khomeini, and I was just horrified, because using Islam, using religion as a tool of for repression and suppression is you would think that nobody would be able to get away with that these days, but the horror of it is astonishing.
Thank you for that poem. Wow. It blew me away. It reminds me of Charles Dickens in the way he juxtaposes the hard times, sorrow with joy. And at first we see these women having a good time and dancing. And then it culminates in, obviously, the things that you end on here. So,
right, we take so many things for granted, don't we? So I'll read another poem. This one is on page 4, and it's about the first year that the hijab in Iran became mandatory for school children. And have this distinct memory of after we got the uniform, this new school uniform, which consisted of a long manteau with a headscarf and loose fitting pants. My mom stood my sister and I with our new uniforms on the balcony and took a picture of us. And I think she was aware that she was documenting history. Hijab in 3rd grade. This one does not have an artwork associated with it. Hijab in 3rd grade. It's autumn of 1981. Radiators in the hall clang in time for a new uniform. Her mother hands the shop lady a list. There is no need to undress, she says. Shaking out a full-length overcoat, she slides the schoolgirl's arms through both sleeves. Wide hems overhang the shirred cuffs of her peacock green peacoat. In the mirror, buttoned up the midline to the schoolgirl's throat, is midnight, falling darkly to her ankles, shunning her shins. An opaque cutout of a cloud is folded into a triangle and cast over her head. Fingers wedge her bangs under, repeatedly pleading with stars to retreat and keep out of sight. 2 stray ends of the night droop aimlessly. At her chest, the lady gathers and ties them into a double knot, a lock under the chin. It's time to come to terms with the dark. Schoolgirl looks up to give thanks, but the lady has forgotten every shape there is to a smile. Next, I'm going to read a war poem. Shortly after, a year after the revolution of 1978-79, in 1980, the Iran-Iraq war started that lasted 8 years. And I was there for the first 4 years of the war. This is on page 19. War of the Cities. It's 1983. Actually, sorry, I think this one does have an image. So let me share it with you. Oh, no, sorry. I think I'm supposed to read a different poem. Oh, well, that's okay. I'll read this one first, and then I'll read the other one. So this is War of the Cities. It's 1983. Flowers smell of salt and ashes, and War of the Cities is intent on shaking us like dust off the face of the map, burying us where we hunch at the kitchen table over tomorrow's schoolwork. My sister worried the trembling flame of the oil lamp could give us away. We wear our day clothes to bed like soldiers lie semi-propped up. A flashlight sinks into Layla's pillow like a doll. Deaf and dumb, our parents move blindly about the house, what senses they have honed. The sky overhead resigned, starless. In the small hours, I daydream of heaven, Mama, Baba with Layla, my palm in Madar's. We rise out of an immaculate ruin against a backdrop of hellfire. Flanked on both sides by fallen martyrs, their blood scabbed into fields of poetic poppies that die at the vanishing point. I run ahead and call capriciously, Mama. She swivels for me like a sunflower. My mute father whispers into her ear something in passing, something unassuming, yet his voice catches on a Caspian sea breeze and carries. The siren means we have 4 minutes to spare. I have learned to hear past the insistent holler. I listen for the seething stealth that precedes the blast, for the hiss of a viper close to release of venom. On his run, the bomber favors densely populated quarters and hospitals. But why, I wonder, does he always arrive after dark?
Wow. She swivels for me like a sunflower. I can see that.
This next one has to do with my experience of praying as a child. I was a very devout child. No one in my family was particularly devout except my grandmother, and I used to like to pray with her. And I had this distinct memory of having a very ecstatic moment while praying. And it was just so amazing. And then I thought it would happen again every time I prayed, and then it didn't. And this poem is born out of that, but it's also, I think, referring to the brainwashing that was starting to, I think, a certain level of indoctrination was beginning to, I think, take place in my psyche. And we had so many more hours of religious studies at school all of a sudden. And I was naturally sort of inclined toward anything that was emotionally rich, just like poetry, and the verses to me just sounded so beautiful, and I had no idea what they meant. They sounded like poetry and music to my ears. And in Muslim theology, you are not allowed to recite the Quran in translation. It has to be recited in Arabic. So I was reciting in Arabic, and I couldn't figure, I didn't understand what I was saying at all. And I did try reading. There's this tiny script of translation under every Arabic verse. And it was, I kept trying to read the Farsi translation. I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't decipher it. It was either, I don't know why. But so this poem is born out of that experience, and it's on page 25. Intoxicated by verses. Even the Farsi translation, the barely legible print beneath each calligraph line, calls for translation. How scholarly she is at 10, Squatting, cross-legged, hunched over the book of spells she spreads daily on her knees. Thou shalt not touch the verses. With the full length of her arm, she turns each page from one corner of the magic world to the next, careful not to scare the sacred, the gilded accents, little blades suspended, twinkling over the cursive script. Thou shalt not recite in a foreign tongue. She loves the Arab tongue of God. She loves her lips sliced with surahs, the consonants he thrusts to the back of her throat, the long vowels he sustains on her breath. Her incantations soar, her white chador, a floating tent sewn, sunny with daisies, beaming with childhood. She pauses to drink at the turquoise bank. The hand-painted margin of the page hems her faith and brims with embossed blossoms. Then dervish-like, rocking with each Sibylline verse that rises out of her pliant throat, she is the reverberating masjid dome, poised over her paisley janamas. Birds of praise come nesting, they come cooing, darting out and into her chador. Each surah, the utterly incomprehensible spell she incants from her proud minaret, her cupped hands, an invitation for God to join her, dance with her on the naked waters of her childhood. Before long, dancing too shall be forbidden.
Rooja, do you want to talk about your decision to put that in the third person rather than in the first?
You know, it used to be in first person.
Mm-hmm.
When and this poem has been published in 2 different places, and I think in the first place is in first person. I think it was first published in the Ekphrastic Review, and it was in first person, and then it was published in the Dewdrop. It was in, and now it's in third person. I guess I was experimenting with distance, and I thought in third person, she, even though there is more distance, in fact, the girl comes nearer to us. It's funny what distance can do. I have more distance from her, but I think she, as a result of that, she comes closer to the reader. Do you think it works in third person?
I was just going to say, I see that, I feel that. I agree with that decision.
Yeah. It's fun to do that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
To play with that. Let's see. So I'm going to now read a poem that I have never read before. And it's on page 61. I have some poems in the collection that I call, I'm not quite sure what I should call them, but I call them my rage poems. And I debated quite a while whether to leave these poems in the collection or not. And then I realized they do reflect some of my experience of being a woman, of being an immigrant woman, of being a woman of color, and I thought, so I decided to leave it. And this is the image that goes with it, that inspired it. It's on page 61. I've asked for it. This is how my flesh is made taboo. Desire bears its head, you beat it with the same stick your father raised, imagining you differ from a fanatic who, upon seeing a swallow, prays for the cup to pass from him. He takes no notice of clouds thin and see-through in the distance, of rarefied air, of the respite offered by limbs bowing under the belly of sparrows. You lower your gaze for fear of the open sky, swallow a holy verse like a pill. The orgasm, though, is inevitable. Your frame shakes, each spasm a reason to consign your wife and daughters to a shapeless corner of the room, their hair tied back out of the wind. You cannot help, it jostles its way in clumsily, rude as the repressed id, which in spite of all efforts won't learn the difference between wife, daughters, and sky. It can't help but crave the flush of dawn, the swift whip of the pixie swallow against its cheek. To remedy this, you escort me to an improper room of your dreams. It's all very heady here. I'm a minor or a married woman whose bare arms belong as yet to no one or someone. In your dream, I'm dirty. I've asked for it, which is fine. But won't you step into the open now? Won't you call my name? Don't you see? Here I stand, the fresh air, this slice of blue, the taste of rapture in my mouth. And next poem is the title poem, which I've also never read before. When Your Sky Runs Into Mine. And it's on page 72. And it has an epigraph from The Merchant of Venice. The curse never fell upon our nation till now. I never felt it till now. When your sky runs into mine, I'll be sure to see to your needs, address you with the appropriate personal pronoun. If you've left behind your hands, organs, dimensions, senses, affections, passions, I'll assist you in seeking immunity, in signing the requisite papers. When your sky runs into mine, I'll grade your pigmentation by degrees, screen you under fluorescent glare, and adjust your protection factor. In class, when your child raises his hand, I'll give him a chance to demonstrate your literacy rate. In mixed company, I'll commend your tongue on how well it speaks my tongue as you pronounce my name, your accent on a foreign syllable. When you naturalize, I'll welcome you with a handful of questions. Where were you born? Are you still mourning? Have you sworn to return home? When I visit your country, I'll carry a trifle of your words to use in fair trade. I'll express myself with a generous tip and thank you and yours for civilizing your children not to stare, for sterilizing the countertops for my intestinal flora. When your sky runs into mine, I'll read your poem and compliment Jalaluddin Rumi on his mother tongue.
Wow. Rooja, tell us about your decision to title the collection When Your Sky Runs Into Mine.
Sure, here's my puppy, by the way.
Hey, puppy, what's your puppy's name?
She's Kara.
Kara. Bruiser, do you want to come over?
You're gonna show your.
I was going to show him, but he's sleeping. Come on, puppy hound. Do you want to say hi? Okay. Here's mine. This is Bruiser.
It's adorable.
Sorry, he was just sleeping.
What's his name?
Bruiser.
Bruiser.
But he's not really a bruiser.
That
was a really lovely and piercing poem. Do you want to talk about your decision to make that the title of the collection?
Sure. Well, the title of the collection, I had a really hard time giving the collection a title. The book grew out of my thesis manuscript at during my MFA at Pacific, and even the thesis, which pretty much is the collection with a few poems added and a few taken out, even then I had a hard time giving it a title. And at one point it was called We're a Woman Somewhere.
Mm.
And I loved that title. And there was a poem in there that was called We're a Woman Somewhere, but I ended up taking that out of the collection. But I couldn't pronounce all those W's. It was kind of hard for my mouth. And also anytime I shared what the title was, everyone would ask me, what was that again?
Mm.
And so I thought, okay, this is not going to stick. And it was Shara McCullum actually who put the last touches to the book. She just moved a few poems around and it really fell into place. And she suggested this title, and I thought, oh, it's I loved it. I think it's a nice phrase for a title. And I realized also that the poem in the collection was actually doing a lot of work. It's a poem that is in the voice of, I guess, the voice of a majority culture, maybe, or the in the host country, and addressing a displaced person, or a refugee, an immigrant, and any of those, and the tone is slightly patronizing, and the poem itself actually grew. It was in response to an experience that I have, and I still have. I have it all the time. When people hear that I'm a poet, the first thing they ask me is, so do you write in English?
Mm.
And for me,
in the United States, people ask you, do you write in English?
Oh, yes, in particular in the United States, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it's a very triggering question. I think because I think there's an assumption there, which is that there's a sense of ownership to the language. It's like saying this is not your language, and of course the assumption there is that I would not be able to do a good job in this language, and I think it's extremely wrong. For one thing, I never think of myself as a second language speaker. I speak 5 languages, and my languages, my proficiency in them just depends on how much I use them, and they're always in flux, and I do think that those of us who have access to more languages, something happens to your appreciation of language. You have a lot more syntax at your disposal. You are a lot more flexible with how you formulate, how you put words together. You don't have that rigidity of this is the right way of saying something, and I think that is just not appreciated enough, especially in those of us who speak several languages. I think there is this. We've internalized the kind of attitude that you cannot be a poet if you're writing across languages. I have Chinese, I have French, I have Italian, I have Farsi in my manuscript, and so yeah, that's why I decided to read this poem tonight. Because I thought, it is a part of my experience, and it continues to be. And I had to think about it. I had to think about, why does it bother me? I mean, I received so many compliments on my manuscript, and the compliment often tends to be, it's really good for someone who's writing not in their mother tongue. And that is not a compliment. It's an insult. In other words, they have boxed my manuscript into a certain very specific sort of, they've labeled me as a certain kind of poet, and I think poetry is is truly your appreciation of image and music, and it's not bound by language.
Thank you for sharing that. Wow.
Thank you for
Well,
asking.
it's sort of
It's hard for me to talk about this.
No, I'm glad you did talk about it. The next question that I have for you is sort of along those same lines, in terms of as a woman and as a person of color who has also suffered the violence of patriarchy. I found some of these poems particularly hard to read, and I can imagine that they may have been hard to write. And so I wanted you to talk about your process in writing these poems, in particular, how you kept from being overcome or sort of taken under by rage or sadness or despair.
Thank you for that, for asking that. I think, my process of coming to these poems and coming to this project of writing poems that are inspired by my uncle's artwork was actually, it was out of necessity. I felt so much grief at the way my uncle's life in particular had, the course it had taken with this regime and the way they treated him and his art.
Mhm.
And also my family, my parents having to leave their wonderful community and home and late in life because they could no longer take it there. I think no one is willingly displaced. And it also my own trajectory of my own sort of journey of coming to find a voice was painful. And so I think these poems for me writing these poems have been a way of finding a way of dealing with all the events, the political events that have influenced our personal lives, my family's personal life and my life. And I had I realized that I had denied a certain part of myself, that I had to reclaim myself and find agency again. And it was through going back to my memories and who I was before I left Iran. I had very little memory of my childhood. And so there was just a lot of grief. And so I was willing to sit with these wounds, and his artwork helped a lot. I felt like he had left them for me, for this process, for me to go through this process. And I feel extremely lucky and privileged now to have this book and to be able to talk about it. And so yes, I guess I did hit rock bottom. I was very depressed, and climbing out has not been easy, but I wouldn't change any of it.
Wow. Well, speaking about family, if you don't mind me asking a personal question.
Go ahead.
These are written in response to your uncle's artwork, and you mention family quite a bit in the collection. And I just wonder if you are willing to share the way your family members responded to the poems that you've written here. Have they read them?
So I think one of my biggest regrets is that my uncle is not around to see this collection. That's fate has funny turns, and this just happens to be one of them. But and also my parents are both deaf mute, and my communication with them is at a very basic level. It's sign language. It's practically impossible for me to, for one thing, they don't speak English. And even if I think even if the book is translated into Farsi, if it ever is translated into Farsi, they would not be able to follow. They have, I think, a grade school literacy level. And so I have, the way I've explained to them, first of all, for Christmas, everybody in my family, this is what they got for each person got a copy of my book. And then I explained to them that there was a poem in there for each of them, and a couple for my mom, and a few for grandma, and there's even one for great grandma, and a couple for grandpa. So I just sort of, and they said, well, what is it about? And so I explained that it's, my life story, and I just spoke about certain sort of moments of like leaving them at the airport and things that, they would be able to relate to. But they follow sometimes if I have a Zoom event or something, they follow, and they love to see me chat. They cannot hear what I'm saying, but it's nice when they can see my uncle's artwork.
Okay. Yeah, I write quite a bit about my family, and I'm lucky that they don't read. So they don't know what I'm saying about them. So I'm with you on that.
It is kind of freeing, isn't it?
It is very freeing. It is very much so. I know in just 1 minute, we are going to have to open up the floor for questions, but I guess the last thing that's sort of on my mind is just the bravery that it takes in writing something like this. Were you not afraid to pin these poems? Well, to pin them is one thing, to publish them is quite another, right?
Right. So I guess in writing them, I did not have any thoughts of audience or who I was writing for. As I mentioned, I was just writing, I felt like it was a necessity for me to transform all of these things that, I had experienced and come to terms with them. And then publishing, I did consider for a moment that, putting this book out in the world will likely make it impossible for me to return to Iran under this regime. And I realized that was not even something that I would contemplate, not publishing it because of that. It would have been, it's not something my uncle would have done. He never censored his art, and I could never do that. And I think also, that's what the women and the people in Iran are fighting for, is freedom of expression. And I am really very hopeful that soon we will be able to, the arts will be a medium of expression for everyone there. And I mean, Iran is a country that has this very long-standing history of poetry, and censorship has always been a big part of it, because they have had various, for instance, even during the time of Hafiz, and they have had to, depending on who was in power, there were certain things that could not be said. And so a lot of use of symbolism and to express certain things, like even the drinking, which you see a lot, the metaphors of wine, is something that can only be presented as a symbolic thing. And so that's how, you get away with having Hafiz in Iran. So, artists have always worked around censorship. Like in Iran right now, the cinema is a perfect example of, there's so much that cannot be displayed. And yet Iranian movies are very powerful. But I think, it should not be that way. Ali should not be in prison. A poet does not belong in a prison. It just makes sense to me. So I think I'm not so much afraid. I think, it's not such a brave thing that I have done. I think the bravery really is with the Iranian people and people on the streets out there, really putting their lives at risk to go out. And I mean, if they are out on the street, it's, very likely that they have, they lose their jobs if at work they find out that they have been at a protest, the following day they no longer have a job. And so it's just a huge sacrifice and risk. And so we're all keeping our fingers crossed and holding our breath here as Iranians.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrienne.
We do have some questions from the audience. I think a couple of them were sort of wonderfully woven in to your conversation already. And so I think we've got time for about one question. And so I'll just ask a question that came in recently. Roni writes, Rooja, a novel by the author Diva Karuni was translated into a theatrical piece. Would you consider this as an option to provide access to your literary work?
I am very happy if anyone would like to take my work and create anything with it, choreograph it in any way you would like, make it into an opera. Thank you for that question, Roni.
Maybe we have time for one more. So I'll just ask the first part. I think the second part of the question was answered. Bay writes, you left Iran so long ago. How do you think time and geographical distance helped in creating this collection?
Thank you, Bea, for the question. I think the collection has, I think time is definitely a factor. It has taken me all these years to come to a place where I feel like I need to come to terms with everything that has happened and have confidence, I suppose, to be able to tell the story and feel that the story is not unique. I feel it's a story, and it's not particularly Persian or Iranian or even an immigrant story. It is all of those things, but it's also just a very human story. It's a story of coming of age and of transforming what life hands you and moving, and not just coping, but actually taking what you have, the hand that has been dealt to you, and making much of it. And I think it's really not unique, and I think the collection will resonate with many. Just as my uncle's artwork was not particularly Iranian at all, I think my collection is also not particularly Iranian. It's just a story of a person's life. It's a memoir, and it has all these ups and downs of a hero's journey. It comes full circle. I end the collection with a poem that is about my great-grandmother and heritage and family. And so don't know if that was actually answering the question, but
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful note to end on. Rooja Mohassessy, Adrienne Christian, thank you so much for joining us this evening at Home with Literati. You can purchase When Your Sky Runs Into Mine from Literati Bookstore. There's a link in the chat, and there's a link in the description below if you're watching us later on YouTube. Hope to have you both in the store in the not too distant future, or again here at Home with Literati for your next collections. But until then, we hope you continue to be well. And to our viewers, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next event. Take care all. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.
thank you.
Rooja, that was fantastic.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you for being there with me. Thank you, John.
Of course. Bye all.
John.
Bye.